Vergilius has the best sky I've ever seen in a video game. Bright, golden clouds melting down from the heavens into a sickly green ribcage obscured by beautifully dynamic clouds. It's an Antonovian skybox turned surreal nightmare. It's bold and explosive, and so it's a kind of pity that the game that takes place underneath it is so apologetic and defensive when it really wouldn't need to be. Vergilius describes itself as a short experimental walking simulator, made mostly as a fun graphics experiment, as if to say that it's not really a game, that it's just meant to be pretty and cool, trying to downplay its supposed lack of traditional interactivity. The main character continues to meekly gesture at his own ineffectuality, bemoaning his existence as a genre-typical floating camera. "I have no legs, but I must walk," he complains at the player, who has to do all the walking through the fittingly empty and barren world, a dead desert, dry and completely without gameplay. But when you stand still, nothing happens. Ironically, the little monologues that tell you about your lack of impact only start in reaction to your actions. Even if Vergilius doesn't want to admit it, walking is gameplay. A Fata Morgana will appear, a From Softwarean forest of clouds, seemingly tangible but glued to the skybox, forever out of reach. Vergilius bemoans his fate once more, this rotten sea of non-existence, before the next untouchable thing appears, a memory not tacked into the distance, but hovering in the HUD, glued behind your eyes. You can't touch these things, you can't interact with them, it doesn't matter what you do, because they happen to you. Vergilius becomes defensive about this lack of meaningful interaction and makes the character complain about how he has to wander aimlessly in some unfinished wasteland. The game is defending itself from the typical walking sim criticisms by voicing them before you can. It seems almost ashamed of what it is, and over concern about mollifying an invisible critic, it completely overlooks the incredible mechanical power of walking. Because when the game finally does give you something you can touch, something concrete, then the player actually has an incredibly meaningful choice. Do they walk towards the towers that rise from the sand, or do they turn away, hoping to find something better in the endless desert? Vergilius is, perhaps by accident, a sunken cost fallacy simulator. The more time you spend going in the wrong direction, the less likely you are to turn around, even when it becomes more and more apparent that you really should. It's the gambler's mindset, a kind of horribly deep-rooted desire to just go one more step, to just see what's behind the next hill, because the idea of having been wrong all this time is too horrible to face. During my research, I encountered some comments about a mysterious black orb that's supposed to be somewhere in the game. I'd played through it many times by now, but I'd never encountered that orb, so I booted the game up again to look for it. I spent 30 minutes walking towards the ominously dark part of the horizon, discovering nothing. But with every step, I found ways to convince myself that this would lead to something new, to some sort of orb-shaped reward. The shadows of trees became compass needles, pointing me to true north. I discovered plants I hadn't noticed before and convinced myself that they were becoming more frequent. Actually, the black orb can be seen as a black dot, kind of from the start of the game, and you can walk to it pretty much from the beginning. When you arrive there, it plays some garbled ramblings in an endless loop. As is so often the case in video games, the reward isn't as exciting as the journey, but damn, what a journey it was! Even without any explicit mechanics, even without anything resembling a traditional game. After the skybox mirage and the HUD memory, Vergilius' intended path sees you travel to two towers that spawn in a visually pleasing way, complete with perfectly aligning trees. There's a sword there, that you can't pick up of course, but that you can use to remove yourself from the game, ending the horrible experience of being trapped in the endless wasteland, making Vergilius fall in the somewhat typical category of walk around until you die type of game. The empty world is hell or purgatory or something, and the only way to leave is to go to the exit. And on the way to this very traditional ending, your character won't tire of pointing out how little control you have over the experience and how empty and barren all of it is. This is just a little walking simulator. Ignore the endless expanse of the desert and the incredible power that is inherent in every step you take. Isn't it funny how you had no choice all along? By the way, did you get that you play as Virgil and that all of this is kind of vaguely gesturing in the direction of Dante's Inferno? Did you get that? Good, because it's over now. Vergilius describes itself as a short, experimental walking simulator made mostly as a fun graphics test. As a graphic test, it's roaringly successful, possessive of an elusive otherworldliness unlike anything I've ever seen. It's also definitely a short walking simulator, impressively telling a very traditional non-story, wistfully philosophizing about the absence of its gameplay systems. I just can't bring myself to actually call it experimental.